for interdisciplinary research or pair. You just saw the video about the pair. And today we are going to have another lecture. This will be conducted by Dr. Yulong Wang. And before that, I would like to invite Professor Chris Chow, the Vice President for Research and Innovation, to give the introduction to the speaker. Professor Chow, please.
Hey, can you hear me? Good. I think I just stand here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is of great pleasure and privilege today to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Yulong Wang, who will talk about the evolution of surgical robots and telemedicine technologies, the related marketplaces, as well as the changes in healthcare delivery from an entrepreneur's perspective. Dr. Wang is the founder of several companies providing digital and information technology solutions for healthcare. These include the founding of Computer Motion, a company which pioneered surgical robotics in 1990, as well as the founding of InTouch Health, a company providing digital solutions for hospital and health systems in year 2003. InTouch Health was acquired by Teladoc Health in 2020 for $1.1 billion, and Dr. Wang now serves as a fellow at the company. Dr. Wang is a prolific inventor determined to bring betterment to the community, not only through inventions, but also his efforts to drive corporate social sustainability. He co-founded MedSex Health, a company to maximize access to telesurgery, and World Telehealth Initiative, a non-profit organization that engages volunteer clinicians and telemedicine to deliver sustained healthcare expertise to impoverished areas in the world. Dr. Wang received a doctoral degree in electrical and computer engineering from UC Santa Barbara in 1988 and has been utilizing his expertise in game-changing technologies and research. He invented the voice-controlled robotic arm, or ESOP, the first surgical robot approved by the Food and Drug Administration, as well as the ZEISS robotic surgical system, which performed the world's first transatlantic surgery. Dr. Wang is the author of more than 50 technical applications and inventor of over 200 patents. Dr. Wang's contribution to healthcare and humanity has attracted many international and national recognitions, including the 2017 IEEE Medal for Healthcare Innovation and the election to the National Academy of Engineering in 2011. He holds important positions as director, president, and advisor in healthcare and higher education sector to drive institutional development. These include the Hart Memorial Hospital in Newport Beach, California, the American Telemedicine Association, Well Air, the Cottage Health System in Santa Barbara, California, as well as the electrical and computer engineering and the mechanical engineering departments of the University of California at Santa Barbara. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Yulong Wang, our keynote speaker today. Thank you.
And I'm gonna remove this. So thank you very, very much for that kind introduction, Professor Zhao and Professor Chen. It's a real honor to be able to speak here today. Am I supposed to do something? Okay. This is actually, I think, the first time I've given a public talk since COVID started. And so it's a real pleasure and honor to be able to be out and speaking with people today. And I hope that we actually end this meeting with a good discussion. I think that as Professor Zhao has mentioned, I've really been involved in 4 things. So I think there's going to be 4 segments. First segment, robotic surgery. Second segment, medicine. Third segment, some products involved in healthcare medicine. Areas of the growth. Fourth segment to be about home surgery. And very involved in the phase. And at the end, I'm going to try to pull it all together. Actually make the entire thing come as one whole effort. That's what I mentioned. To repair whatever's inside. And then minimally invasive surgery is when they just make multiple small puncture holes operated on the patient. So they don't fusion that's happened during during open. This graph, you can see the bottom is years, and then the y-axis is the volume, and this is the transformation of one of the core surgeries called laparoscopic cholecystectomy or the gallbladder removal. You see how rapidly it transitions from open, line which starts high and goes low, to minimally invasive. And the other point you can see is how the volume of procedure went up dramatically from where it was. And that's because people were not as afraid as getting this type of procedure because it was much, much less invasive. So this is basically when my career started, right around that 19 time period. And I got involved by building a robot which acted like the third arm for a surgeon. And actually, with a student of my father's, built a voice-controlled third arm, a full camera for the surgeon. So if you think about an open surgery, the surgeon looks inside the patient's body and confident. Minimally invasive surgery, the surgeon looking at it. Someone else is holding the camera. The problem was that it's like if you and I are in a dark room, you have the flashlight, but I want to see where I want to go, and I keep trying to tell you where to point the flashlight, but it's not very accurate. Would I rather just grab that flashlight? And that was this system which Professor Zhao, it was ESOP, and that it was the first time the FDA had cleared a surgical robot. It had some funding from NASA, so we actually got on the cover of the NASA magazine. That was kind of the beginning of this area of surgical robotics. The next problem at hand was not just to hold the camera, the actual instrument. So the picture here is of a laparoscopic surgical instrument. It's got a long shaft, and it's a mechanical tool, and they're very hard to operate with a lot of dexterity. So what if in robotics, using robotics, you effectively cut that instrument in half and you put a computer between the handle and the tip? So now you can have a computer algorithm controlling the relationship between the handle and the tip. And by doing that, you can do things like eliminate tremor. We all have a 7 to 10 hertz tremor in our hands. You can scale motion. You can actually put a little tiny wrist out at the tip so that inside the body, past the port, you can actually have very fluid motions like this. And this is what robotic surgery has become. It's become an arm which holds the camera and two more arms, which are the instruments. And this is the system we built, and it was called Zeus. As this was moving forward, Computer Motion, my company, ended up merging with a company called Intuitive Surgical. And today, the dominant robot is a robot called Da Vinci, and it looks like this. And the Da Vinci surgical robot is continuing to move very effectively in the marketplace. And this is the adoption rate, which is happening in robotic surgery, from hernia repairs to colectomies, reflex surgery, prostatectomies, cholecystectomy, which is the one I mentioned earlier. And where it actually, the whole thing started was in prostate surgery. Prostate surgery, it turned out that the prostate is located deep inside the male's pelvis. And to take a prostate out, you have to cut the two sides of the bladder and the urethra, and you have to pull the prostate out, sew those two back together. And it's very, very difficult to sew those pieces back together so deep inside the pelvis. So that was the procedure which actually got robotic surgery going, but it's continuing to grow, and it's continuing to grow very well. And in fact, last year, well over 1 million procedures were performed using the Da Vinci system, and that's continuing to move very rapidly in the surgical space. And I'm going to be coming back to this area later in my talk, but it was at about this point in time when Computer Motion was bought by Intuitive. The Da Vinci kept proliferating robotic surgical procedures. But right before that merger happened, I was involved in developing an experiment, a procedure where a French surgeon from New York City operated on a patient in Strasbourg, France, 5,000 miles away. And that's called the Lindbergh procedure, and it was completed on September 7th, 2001. And let me play a little video here about it. That's Professor Moresco.
Modern medicine, that's nothing takes forward in everyday surgery. Patients anywhere in the world. Doctors in New York City completed the first ever remote surgery. So, doctors, medical robots, and fiber optics opened up a new chapter. Surgery called telesurgery. In 19
So that's me 22 years ago.
What is the particular effort to, you know, a little more than a decade, history has changed at least people in open. Somebody fully engaged.
So, as I mentioned, Computer Motion was acquired by Intuitive, 2003. I was involved in this procedure in 2001. So in 2003, it gave me the opportunity to think about, okay, what do I do next? So I started a company called InTouch Health. And InTouch Health was about telemedicine in general, but it wasn't telesurgery. Telesurgery was not ready for the public markets at that point in time. But potentially telemedicine was. And why would telemedicine be helpful? If you look on the graph on the left, that's the proliferation of medical subspecialties in the field of clinical medicine. In 1970, there were about 20 different types of medical specialties: gynecology, cardiology, urology, et cetera, et cetera. Today, there's over 150. Like there is a pediatric urologic oncologist that did not exist over a couple of decades ago. A stroke neurologist didn't exist. Neurological intensive care specialist did not exist. But if you have one of those problems, that's the person you want to see. The other thing which is happening is there's not an increase in enrollment in medical schools. In medical schools, so you have the same number of clinicians spread over more and more subspecialties. Everybody wants good quality care, but how do you do that? How do you get access to the right expertise conveniently? The other thing which is going on, and it's actually being driven a lot by the subspecialization of medicine and the actually aging population, is the cost. Cost of healthcare is continuing to climb. In the United States, it's 20% of the gross domestic product, and it's just continuing to become a larger and larger societal burden. So you want high quality care, you want access to that care, you want to be able to have it reliable, and you want to lower the cost. How are you going to do that? Well, we're in an era where we are digitizing everything medical records, imaging, and then now with telemedicine, what you're able to do is you're able to take one of these subspecialists, equip them with all of the best information about that patient. But without telemedicine, you can only have that clinician interact with patients in their immediate vicinity. But what if you could actually take that expertise and propagate it across geography and time? That's effectively what telemedicine is doing. It's actually allowing an expert practice their expertise without any geographic boundaries. And so what InTouch did is use that concept and then build a business where we were able to leverage expertise across geography. And we had to do it in a way which people made money too, and then InTouch made money. And where we found the opportunity, which was the point of the arrow for the growth of the company, was in telestroke. In the US, stroke was the third leading cause of death, first leading cause of disability, 700,000 strokes a year. Yet only 3 to 5% of patients were treated properly. How could that be? How could you only treat 3 to 5% properly? It's not because people practice poor medicine, it's because of time. In order to get good treatment of stroke, you need a stroke neurologist to see that patient within 3 hours. So now if you have 2,000 stroke neurologists across the country, treating 300 million people, And you've got to be able to get to them within a 3-hour time period in order to deliver right care. It's a very difficult thing. So this is where we develop what you call today telestroke.
Diagnose patients and in some instances make life-saving decisions from miles away much faster when every second counts. We get our report tonight from CNBC's Julia Borstein. To see Edith Long now, you'd never know she recently had a near-death experience. When she suffered a stroke, there was no specialist at the hospital that night to evaluate her. So a robot named RP Vita came to call, connecting a doctor 25 miles away.
The next thing I remember is the robot coming into the room and Dr. Lee introducing himself to me.
When neurologist Dr. Andrew Lee got the call at home, instead of getting in his car, he powered up his iPad and immediately examined Edith through the robot's monitor.
I did notice that she had profound weakness of her left arm and her left leg.
He ordered a clot-busting drug within minutes.
For every minute that's lost in someone who's suffering a stroke, 1.9 million brain cells could be possibly irreversibly damaged.
So Dr. Lee, if you were to evaluate a stroke patient through this robot, what would you do?
To assess for strength and coordination, I would have you raise both arms up as if you're holding a tray and take your left index finger and touch your nose.
So this would allow you to assess a patient without actually being in the room.
Absolutely.
There are 28 of these RP Vita robots in use so far. Doctors who use the technology say it's a game changer.
We are able to actually provide these services to some of the smaller community hospitals. There is a large cost savings and the ability to treat many more patients.
Thanks to the robot, Edith Long made a full recovery.
To be back to normal so fast brings tears to my eyes because I'm back to my normal life.
So that's telestroke as a use case, but there's many use cases which have those same characteristics. Neonatal care, trauma, cardiology, etc. These are all examples where it's difficult to get the right specialist to the patient on a timely basis. And if you can do so, you actually improve quality of life, you improve quality of care, and you lower costs as well, because long-term disability is very, very expensive. Let me back up a second and think about kind of technology transformation in a more macro sense of the world. This is a slide with documents, imaging, et cetera, but then you can have virtual care, which is a subset of digital health, which requires an interaction with a patient. And that interaction can be done with a clinician or perhaps even an AI engine or some type of algorithm. And then a subset of that, you would use telemedicine. So telemedicine, virtual care, digital health, I think are kind of framing of a growing expansiveness. Digital health, embracing of digital health in many different use cases is really how healthcare is going to adopt this fourth industrial revolution. What you have in the internet, you will put cloud-based computational power, you put cloud-based storage, and this is really how I believe the healthcare system of the future is going to look. Now, I've been in telemedicine for 20 years now, over 20 years, and probably started about 2015, 2016, 2018, it was finally starting to grow. It was growing very nicely. Our company was doing well. And then COVID hit. And that's one of these situations where it was just fuel on top of the fire. So 2015, 16, 17, 18, telemedicine growing at say 30%, very healthy growth. 2020, this is a graph from the Mayo Clinic, one of the premier healthcare institutions of the United States. And the markers along the bottom are weeks. And that's March 11th is the very first one, then March 18th, March 25th, et cetera. The Mayo Clinic was doing maybe 400 virtual consults a day back in the March 11th timeframe. But then in a matter of a few weeks, it jumped to nearly 8,000. So it was an incredible accelerate. This is just one example, but this was happening everywhere. I don't know what was happening exactly here in Hong Kong, but I'm sure that there was a lot of adoption happening in telemedicine where it wasn't so before. It's interesting because what happened was telemedicine was given a new value proposition. The value proposition of telemedicine prior to COVID was convenience, easy access to expertise on a very efficient basis. COVID, why did telemedicine adopt? It was another value proposition of protection. You now could not, you can't transmit a disease through a telemedicine interaction. And so that's actually what was happening. It was the adoption was driven dramatically. Now you see a peak and you see it drop again, but you see it holding at a level significantly higher than where it was pre-pandemic. And now here we are later, and I think what people say, and it's not been studied rigorously, but in the United States, maybe 20 to 30% of all clinical interactions are virtual, which is a lot, okay, as opposed to a couple of percent or something like that. And so, and that seems to have stabilized, and it's probably going to keep going up now. And it's also been shown that people like it. I'm not sure how many people here have used a virtual care kind of interaction with their clinician, but at least in the States, it's very common now. It's been shown to have great adoption and engagement, and it's been shown to save money. And it's kind of intuitive why it saves money. You don't have to go in brick and mortar space, have all the administrative work in order to set someone up in their lobby, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So telemedicine and virtual care have really kind of hit the mainstream now. And the question now is, how do you adopt it more systemically? Because healthcare is not going to be purely virtual. I mean, you can't do surgery virtually. You can't do an MRI virtually. You can't draw blood virtually. But you can do a lot of things virtually. So one concept to think about is maybe something like this. Here, this is like in a hospital environment, whether you have flu, pneumonia, urinary tract infection, et cetera. You have to go across. All of those columns represent different types of visits. To go visit a clinician, lab, or something like that, all across that. But what if you can now, the ones you can, make it virtual? So if you look at joint replacement, for example, there's three of the 7 interactions can perhaps now be virtual, which is a big savings and a big convenience. And then that's just kind of in the hospital setting. But I was speaking with Dr. Zhao right before this, and how do you bring this kind of capability out into the community? And that is a very high interest these days, is how do you bring virtual care out into people's homes, people's where they work, et cetera, et cetera. This might be an example of a patient flow with virtual care integrated into the process. So we have a fictitious patient named Bob. Bob has a sore hip. Bob sees his primary care doctor virtually, doesn't go and see him. Primary care doc triages Bob, figures out he needs an orthopedic consult. Bob needs to go into the office in order to have an orthopedic consult. The orthopedist verifies that Bob needs a hip hip transplant or hip replacement. But the orthopedic surgeon says, for me to get a good outcome with your hip replacement, you need to lose some weight. So then he puts Bob on an AI-based virtual care algorithm, which is nudging Bob every day to lose weight. Nudging Bob to not eat too much, nudging Bob to get a little exercise, nudging Bob to eat the right foods, etc. And then it's also keeping track of this so that when Bob hits his desired weight, alerts go out to the orthopedist, goes to the primary care doc, surgery is scheduled. Bob has to go in, get his surgery, he gets his surgery, finishes the surgery, again, prompts go out to the orthopedist, the family, the primary care doctor on, okay, this is done. Now we've got to kick in place the rehab process. Some of the rehab can be done virtually, but rehab where Bob is again encouraged to get some exercise, start walking, again, eat correctly, and then may even have a couple of mental health consults to basically orient correctly. That's the kind of patient engagement which I think is happening now and will become commonplace in the very near future. Let me transition to the third part of my talk. It's with digital health and being internet-based, it's very interesting that this is a worldwide phenomenon. The internet, if you go traveling through sub-Saharan Africa, or you go traveling through some poverty areas of Southeast Asia, you may not be able to find much clean water, but you can find internet. And so with that knowledge, I've been involved in starting a nonprofit called World Telehealth Initiative. And World Telehealth Initiative focuses on the half of the world's population which doesn't have access to healthcare. I think we probably all feel very fortunate that we live either in Hong Kong or I live in California, and we have all of the modern conveniences at our disposal. But half of the world doesn't have. Half the world, many millions of people die every year from very treatable situations, but it's actually, but they just don't have the right expertise to help them through these challenges. The director of the World Health Organization says we must stand together to support all countries and for equitable access to life-saving technologies. And so I think a key point here is technologies are going to be required to solve these problems systemically. Now with InTouch and now Teladoc, because as was mentioned, InTouch was bought about 2.5 years ago by Teladoc, which is where I'm currently a fellow. And on this network, there's many of the top organizations of at least the US on this network. Mayo Clinic, Yale, Harvard, Cleveland Clinic, etc. And they have many of the world's best clinicians on this network. And those expertise can be brought to anywhere instantly if there's internet. So World Telehealth Initiative is to build sustainable medical expertise, the world's most vulnerable communities, to build the local capacity and advance core health services. And so a key point here is that World Telehealth Initiative with a clinician from, say, Harvard, their job is not to take care of as many patients as possible. Their job is to help the local providers take care of their patients, give them help so that it raises capability and capacity of the local communities. And the way we do it is Teladoc donates free technology to World Telehealth Initiative. And it's interesting because it's pretty much of no cost to Teladoc because this whole infrastructure is built and managed for its customers who pay, but the half of the world which would never pay gets to take advantage of this technology infrastructure too. And then World Telehealth Initiative gets volunteer clinicians using that technology to deliver care in these under-resourced communities. So we have about 1,000 physicians on the network right now, and it could easily grow an order of magnitude because we have a lot of people wanting to do this, and we're in about 40 active programs around the world. And you can see they're in places like Sub-Saharan Africa, like Guinea, Togo, Nigeria, Malawi, etc. They're in places like Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia. There's about 50 different medical specialties on this map here, and they're being kind of triaged and brought forward through WTI's efforts in order to bring care to these different areas of underserved. And the use cases that we use or support are the following 4. One is we enable peer-to-peer training. So for example, there is a trauma surgeon in the UK who has developed low resource trauma curriculum. And he actually delivers it to places which need trauma education in that kind of almost a classroom setting. We do clinical consultations. This is where like every Tuesday 2 to 4, we're going to have an infectious disease clinic. And so the local providers bring infectious disease patients forward at Tuesday 2 to 4, and they work through those patients that way. We do surgical mentoring. Surgical mentoring where a surgeon with an expertise, particular type of procedure, looks over the shoulder of a surgeon on site to help them do procedure. Main one that's involved there is what's called obstetric fistula, where when women have a very difficult birth, birthing process, and they may rupture their bladder or their colon, this is sewing those up, and that can be very complicated. But it turns out there's about 2 million women in these under-resourced communities who have these fistulas, and if you fix it, it actually brings them back into society, whereas if you don't fix it, they're kind of outcast. And then the last one is this high acuity care where we have an on-call, a number of clinicians actually jump to help at a moment's notice. We had one 2 days ago where there was a head trauma in Ukraine, and we had a neurosurgeon from Canada beam in to help out with this soldier who had head trauma in Ukraine. These are the things we do with WTI. So what's been so fascinating with WTI, or World Telehealth Initiative, is it was always presupposed that populations we serve will benefit and want it. And that turned out to be true. And we have a lot of different clinics that are looking for this type of support. What was not imagined at the beginning, we didn't know how much we would have to beg clinicians to volunteer their time to help here. We don't only have to not beg them, but we have to kind of push them off. There are so many of these clinicians who want to volunteer. In the US, if you talk to any hospital CEO, what's your biggest problem right now? They'll say clinician burnout. Pandemic exacerbated that. Physicians are quitting, they're feeling very demoralized. All these things are happening in their normal daily work. And what's so interesting here is giving them the opportunity to volunteer in this way has recharged them. And I didn't actually believe that at first, but it's happened over and over again. And Deloitte did a study on this and it's published. This is a page from the Deloitte study, where it turns out when these clinicians can do clinical work, not encumbered by documentation and administrative work, not for the fear of liability. It's a rejuvenating process. So what's very interesting here is WTI, I believe, is going to have a very sustainable growing future because it's not just one-sided. Both sides are benefiting from this. That's kind of moving forward. And what else is so interesting here is that part of the world which can pay for this kind of technology for their own use, that's got to keep going. That's got to fund the technology, but it's just a little bit of a added overhead, if you want to call it that, which is actually bringing this capability to the other half of the world. I'm not exaggerating when I think that if we really wanted to, we could have 500,000 clinicians volunteering for us. You know, we'd have to build the whole platform to scale appropriately. Take 500,000 clinicians and they're each volunteering an hour a week. I mean, that's a massive impact to the healthcare of the under-resourced. So let me transition to my last talk, and then I'll try to wrap up here. This earlier in 2022, I co-founded a new company called Maxis Health. This is about enabling remote surgery. You'll remember the video I played, which was a surgical event we did in 2001, where the surgeon from Strasbourg, France, operated on a patient, from New York, operated on a patient in Strasbourg, France. And as I mentioned, at that point in time, it was too early. The market wasn't ready for that kind of an innovation. I believe it is ready now, and have started a company around this. And the reality is, although there's 8 billion people on the planet, again, over half of the people, even in areas which can pay, don't have access to good surgical care. And so if we could actually enable remote surgery, it could actually change that. And it's again one of those situations where it can provide higher quality care and bring down the cost. Now, to build a remote surgical capability or market, it's not just enabling a surgeon to sit in one place and operate on someone else far away, like I showed in the video. If you talk to the Mayo Clinic, or I'm sure if you talk to one of the medical schools here, say, well, what makes your surgical program so good? They won't say it's just the surgeons. They say it's the entire care pathway we take our patients through. It requires how they do their pre-surgical workup, all the information they have ready the day of surgery, how well the surgeon performs stuff, the post-surgical follow-up, and afterwards. So it's a longitudinal event with surgery in the middle, and that whole care pathway needs to be affected to a remote location. Fortunately, for the last 20 years, that's what's been working. I have been working on that kind of stuff. That's the right side of this diagram here. On the left side is the robot. So how do you do remote surgery? How do you do the surgical event itself? Well, this is where surgical robots come back in. Basically, all surgical robots have two sides to them. One is the side the surgeon manipulates on, and the other side is the side which manipulates on the patient. All of these systems have a cord connecting the two. So the question is, how do you take that cord, cut it at 1,000 miles between it? And that's kind of the task at hand. Now, the other thing which is happening in the surgical robot field is finally there's a massive effort going on with lots of companies building different types of surgical robotic systems. You can see the Intuitive way over on the left there, and it was pretty much by itself for a long time. The Stryker, the next two are actually orthopedic robots. They're not actually laparoscopic robots. There's several here going on in China. There's Kangdu, there's Microport, there's Microbot, there's Edge Medical. These are all Chinese robotic surgical companies. And this is happening now, where you could segment them into these types of robotic systems: laparoscopic, endovascular, so going through the vascular system with a catheter-based robot; endoluminal, going through the natural orifices of the body, again, a robotic catheter-ish type thing, but with different characteristics; the endovascular; and orthopedic, working on hard tissue. But you can see just the number of names at play here is the surgical robot side is about to hit what I called a 3.0 up there at the top. And there's two things which have to happen to enable that 3.0. One is the proliferation of the platforms, and the second thing, high bandwidth, low latency, reliable telecommunication line. And what's so interesting is that's happening, and it's being driven by online gaming. So I guess I can't say anything derogatory anymore about online gaming, but online gaming is driving the telecommunication infrastructure to be able to support this kind of use case as well. And the idea is a surgeon in one geography can be operating might have 5 surgeries in the same day in different locations. This is still quite new, and this is something that I believe is going to happen in the coming years, but it remains to be seen. So let me kind of wrap this all together. I think that this digital health area is going to transform healthcare in the same manner as, and I apologize for using US companies like Amazon or Netflix or Uber transformed each of their various industries. And this is happening, and it's going to continue to happen. But the other thing which is very interesting is, healthcare. If we think about societal equity, one of the biggest components of that is health equity. I probably the two big ones are health equity and educational equity. And if you can actually help with the health equity side, you can actually do a lot towards societal equity. So I think the digital health transformation here, and I would lump telemedicine, remote surgical robots, all into that space. I think that type of capability is going to be adopted by places like Hong Kong and California, because it provides better healthcare, easier access at a lower cost, but it's also the means by which we can drive health equity across the world. And so with that, I'm going to end on a quote. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. This gentleman is the one who developed the Apple user interface. And I thank you very much for your time and attention.
Well, this is a great talk. I learned quite a lot. I didn't know that telemedicine will be so well developed. Now, I think we open the floor for Q&A. So for those online, you could ask questions also by raising your hand, and then I have a little bit of computer here, so I will see who raised their hand, and then I will unmute you, then you can ask questions. So any questions here? Okay, please. Just state your name and then where you are from. Then.
Thank you. I'm Vivian. I'm an assistant professor in School of Nursing. Thank you for your talk. And I have a question about the telemedicine. Actually, I also just come back from Pittsburgh, so I know a lot about the US. But the main thing in Hong Kong right now is doctors and nurses here, we don't have a license all over the places. So when your telemedicine takes place, like Teledol or like Mayo Clinic have some consultation sections, even for the nurses and doctors here, we actually don't have the license there to apply our practice or to help patients all over the world. So what is your perspectives to improve the licensure or to recognize like in a policy level, or like what is your viewpoint on the legal aspect of this kind of stuff? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and it is a very complex question mired in a lot of bureaucracy, as you know, since you were just at UPMC, that nurses and doctors are licensed by state. What they've done in the United States is made it, they have these, they call federal compacts, which allow you to much easily license in multiple states. And so Teladoc, the company I work for, has physicians who are licensed like 20 states and stuff like that. But it's a big undertaking to kind of keep that current, because there's all the renewal process and stuff. I don't know how licensure is set up in Hong Kong and in China, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's similar kinds of things which have to be done in order to, someone like yourself would just have to have multiple license. Now, as you go across countries, that's a whole different deal. And that's not something which has been solved yet. With World Telehealth Initiative, and where we're bringing expertise into these under-resourced areas, quite honestly, they're not even sophisticated enough to have the licenses. And so they're very, like in Ethiopia or Nigeria and stuff like that. Now, I don't mean to say anything disparaging, but they're just very happy to have the assistance. And as I mentioned earlier, there's always a local clinician, and the liability, if there is in the case, stays with that local clinician, and the remote expertise is to enhance that person's knowledge.
Thank you. For those online, if you don't raise the hand, you can also type in your questions in the chat, and then I will read out to Dr. Wang. Any more questions in the audience on site? Yes, please.
Thank you, Dr. Very excellent talk. I'm Wang Qixing, associate professor from the Department of Computing. So my background is in computer science, particularly cyber physical systems, the integration of computer science with the physical domain. Health is one of it. So my question is that from your point of view, what computer science can contribute to your vision, or what kind of computer science challenges is the most outstanding there?
Yeah, another excellent question. And the first answer is everything, okay? Because everything is programmed. I think that I'd have to think longer to give you a very good answer and well thought out answer, but the things which jump to mind immediately are, in the area of data science and algorithms and even machine learning, the ability to help patients take care of themselves and is a big area. And I think that that's going to continue to be a big area. And there's a lot of, and if done well, I think it have a significant contribution. And those areas include things like, chronic diseases, mental health, et cetera. I think that, the other area, if you think about things like telemedicine, just enabling those interactions to be better and better is always a desired thing. I think that there are also lots of areas in this area of personalized medicine. That's I think I can't speak very intelligently about that, but it's really kind of getting a lot of large data sets, segmenting on identifying characteristics of people, and making that very efficient. Those are just off the top of my head, but I think that, to summarize, I think there's no shortage of great computer science-based problems to be working on in this digital health environment.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you for your excellent talk. And I'm a PhD student in biomedical engineering, and particularly in terms of fabricating some biomaterials. So I want to ask one question for telesurgery. Is there any challenges or opportunities for our biomedical related areas, such as the device related? So can you give me some perspective in terms of this? Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for the question. The way we're approaching it is we're working to take robotic surgical systems being built by others, and we're just, as I was mentioning earlier, just trying to cut the cord so the two sides can be separated. So in that sense, I can't immediately think of any kind of new aspects to the mechanism that need to be included, because it's all computing, and it, quite honestly, it falls a little more back to computer science in terms of that bit of work. I guess just again off the top of my head, robotic surgery has been down the pathway of improving surgical precision and capabilities. It hasn't been about enabling a remote expert to help. So if you use that as the main driver, the question is, do you come up with a different surgical robot? And that actually, I think, might be very interesting. You probably don't remember on my slide of all the different procedures of penetration. It showed like prostatectomy is over 80% penetrated, but it had cholecystectomy, which is a simple procedure at 6%. Cholecystectomy was down at 6% because people would think, I don't need a robot to do a gallbladder removal. It's too much technology for a simple procedure. Now, there are many areas of the world which don't have access to a surgeon who can do cholecystectomy. But no, those areas of the world aren't going to buy a $2 million robot in order to do cholecystectomy. So is there a way to build a $100,000 robot which can actually just do cholecystectomy and doesn't have to worry about those other things? That's the kind of thing. And if you come up with something, please call me, because that would be of interest.
All right. Any other questions?
Hello. I came a bit late, but I was watching for the entire seminar online actually. So I came for one specific question. Yeah, but before this, this entire like seminar series is about interdisciplinary education, which is great because I'm doing my major. First of all, I'm an undergraduate student. I'm third year student. I major in electronic and information engineering, and I minor in biomedical engineering. So this is literally very close to me because I would like to continue working in biomedical field in particular. But background information, Hong Kong is the financial center of Asia, and it's not really the industry of the biomedical, especially surgical robots, because I had internships in surgical robots companies here, and there are not too many career opportunities for people like me, for example. So I have a very practical question here. Do you have internships?
Let me give you my email for afterwards. Okay. And thanks for the question.
Any other questions from our online participants? We have quite a number of participants online. So I wonder if you could raise your hand or just type in the questions. Well, if not, I'd like to ask a question. A lot of medical procedures are also needed to touch the patient, etc., right? But from this telemedicine or whatever, this remote type of thing, can you do the same thing? Because sometimes our human hand, this is our very good sensors, right? We can feel quite different from the machine. Are there any difference there?
Well, I think in many, many cases, you can use a tool to replace the in-person touch. And the most common one is ultrasound. And use ultrasound, like many, I've been told, I'm not a physician myself, but I've been told by many physicians that with an ultrasound, I can always do more than I can do with the feeling of touch, like in a primary care exam. So I think that I think you can, well, I don't want to overstate it, but I think you can do nearly everything, if not everything, remotely with the right tools.
All right, it seems we have a question.
Hello, Dr. Wong. very excellent talk. I'm Chen Yi from the Department of Biomedical Engineering. Actually, I have two questions about surgical robot. And the first question is about the cost of the surgical robots. If you want to benefit more people, particularly for the poor and sick people, I would like to have your vision in the future, how we could reduce the cost. Even in Hong Kong, I'm pretty closely work together with the orthopedic surgeon. In Hong Kong, surgical robots have been applied for the joint replacement surgery, but to my best knowledge, only two, the public hospital have such kind of surgical robots for that. So how we could benefit more people using this kind of technology?
Well, I think my belief is in China, and I'll include Hong Kong, China together. I actually think there's a lot going on now in surgical robots, and I'm sure that they're focused on the cost structure, which works for the Chinese market, like the ones I mentioned earlier, Edge Medical, Microbot, et cetera, Kandu. They actually, they're actually building multiple robots. They're building soft tissue robot like laparoscopic robot. They're also building orthopedic robots, et cetera, et cetera. I think though, to be able to get to the real low cost, which is, I think maybe I forgot to mention in my ending slide, so the way my nonprofit World Telehealth Initiative is doing that is we're taking technology which has already been expensed. It's already made the profit it's need to make to support the company, and then we're using it for the underserved. I believe that's going to be possible with surgical robots too. A surgical robot has, the thing about surgical robots and healthcare robots in general, there's not a lot of wear and tear on them. It's not like an industrial robot, which is going through tremendous forces and stuff like that. They can really last a long time. And so I think that for philanthropic surgery, which is where I hope to go eventually, I think we'll be able to use expensed systems to deploy into under-resourced areas.
Okay. The other question is, you also mentioned in your slides, there's more and more company jumping in this field. For example, the Stryker and also Johnson & Johnson, they have the different surgical robot system. However, among them, their system are not compatible, right? Even for the same operation. That's why a lot of surgeons complain. In other words, they will further increase the cost onto the healthcare system and the patients and their families. So for your perspective, whether or not in the future, regardless which company they are just building the same compatible system, just like the Microsoft Teams or Mac, adapt to, almost the most type of the surgery. I would like to seek your advice and perspective on this point.
Yeah, and I think, for-profit companies are always going to do what for-profit companies are charged to do, is build technology and sell it for the maximum profit. And standards are created when it's in all of the company's best interest, which is kind of what you're getting at. Healthcare is one of the worst industries of standards. And people hide behind the fact of, there's the FDA issues, there's like a surgical robot has to get an FDA, at least in the United States, clearance of the whole system. So how do you connect with somebody else's system and get an FDA clearance? So there's those kinds of problems which are inherent in the field that we're talking about. But if there's a way in which standards can emerge, I think that just, I can't say that they're not going to emerge yet, because the industry is still young enough. All those pictures of all those robots come to market, they're not even to market yet. So I think that there's still the possibility of that happening. What my new company is thinking about is can you cut the cord and set a standard between the two sides? And I don't know the answer to that yet. And that's the kind of thing which I wish we can, but I'm not sure how that's going to go.
Okay, thank you. Well, we now do have a couple of questions from the internet. So maybe you just wanted to answer those briefly. The first question is like to hear your view on access to the digital healthcare. It appears that the high-tech healthcare services are usually enjoyed by the rich and the developed countries. Since they have the expertise, money, and hardware to support so, very often CSR is something the company choose to adopt or implement rather than something required or mandate. Do you think the digital healthcare is enlarging the gap between the rich and the poor? What can it be done by the developed countries to alleviate so?
Yeah, that's a significant question. And if I were to paraphrase the question, is digital health going to create more of a divide or less of a divide between the haves and have-nots? And there's, you know, definitely a lot of discussion on that. And I personally think that it has the ability to reduce the divide. And that's what hopefully what I'm doing, this nonprofit work, is doing. It also has the ability to exacerbate the divide. So even in telemedicine in the US, the adoption by the people of means is higher than the adoption of people without means. And it's not even necessarily because of lack of a smartphone, it's a lot about education too. And this is where healthcare and education cross into one another. But I think it won't naturally reduce the divide. It has to be worked at in order to reduce the societal divide.
That's right. It really depends on how you use it, right? Okay. Another question is in touch health was required by Teladoc Health in 2020 for $1.1 billion. What drives the decision? How has that changed the nature and work of In Touch Health?
How has the work changed at In Touch?
Yes.
So what led to the acquisition and how, yeah. So let me start with what led to the acquisition. You know, so In Touch Health was backed by venture capitalists. When you take venture capital money, you have to, your obligation is to give them a return on investment. There are only two ways to get venture capitalists their money back and more is one is to sell the company or go public. So therefore, In Touch had the decision of whether to go public or sell the company. And without going into a long bureaucratic story, we chose to sell the company because the other thing is industries, they often start with a lot of players doing various point solutions. And when the industry matures, a consolidation happens. And usually in the consolidation process, you'll have one big winner. You may have a second one who's a good winner. There might be one who's a reasonable winner, and then everybody else falls off. That's typically how it works. When we became part of Teladoc, we became part of by far the biggest, most successful digital health company out there. Teladoc did about 2.4 billion in revenue last year. The next biggest one's like 250 million. So it's a 10x size difference to the next pure play digital health company. And so that's kind of why we chose to become part of Teladoc. What's changed, what's very interesting is Teladoc, the core business prior to In Touch, it sells to health insurance companies. In Touch sells to hospitals and health systems. It turns hospitals and health systems don't have great relations with insurance companies. That's at least the way it is in the United States. I don't know how things are here, but it's been very interesting where I was of the opinion and still am, but it hasn't played out yet, that Teladoc being able to have both customer bases in the payer side and the hospital's health side, we'd be able to work to our advantage, but it hasn't worked that way yet. It's been difficult playing both sides of customer bases who are always arguing back and forth.
Thank you. Another question, are the current pulley and wire robots like Da Vinci suitable for telesurgery? Or do we need other technologies to operate remotely?
I think the Da Vinci type surgery is very well suited for remote surgery. So its mechanical structure is just fine for remote robotic surgery. But as I said to the earlier question, given remote surgery, it may be possible to build some other robotic systems which are designed for the purpose of remote surgery, as opposed to improving precision and enabling new procedures.
Thank you. Any thought on elevating telehealth further via the uni-industry partnership?
In which industry?
Uni-industry, I don't know, is it uni? Uni industry. I don't know what this uni industry is.
I'm not sure either.
Okay, then let's skip this one.
All right.
Okay, let's go to the last question.
Okay.
What about the ethics, morality of the surgical robots? Who is responsible for any harm to patient, the surgeon or the robots?
So I think if surgical robots today are just a tool.
Yes.
So it's clearly the surgeon, 100%. There's no if and or. I guess if the surgical tool breaks, that's on the manufacturer. But the questions may be directed towards a future of autonomous surgery, and then that question becomes more complicated, a little bit like autonomous cars.
Right. So it's more or less the same like the first law of the robotics, right?
Yes.
Always
Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you very much, Dr. Wang, for your wonderful talk. I think we learned quite a lot. And there's a lot of people also joining online. So let's give Dr. Wang another round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you again for the honor.
So last, I would like to thank all the audience for your participation, and especially for those who ask questions on site or online. And then now I'd like to have a little bit announcement. Pear is going to have the next distinguished lectures, which will be conducted in February, the 9th of February, from 4 to 5:30 p.m. Hong Kong time. So this lecture will be given by Professor Reinhard Genzel, who is the director of Max Planck Institute for Extraterrestrial Physics, and in Germany, and he is a Nobel laureate. So we like to invite all of you to join this lecture next month. Thank you very much. Now this lecture is adjourned. Thank you.